Sir, sir, I'm Mukund Mitra.
Okay, tell me, Okun.
Sir, actually, sir, Sunday before, sir, we all were having a discussion, and sir, we
Huh,
are facing the same problem, sir. Sir, the time given for assignment, sir, sir, it's not sufficient. Questions are very good, so
huh.
we need a considerable amount of time to solve those questions. So, sir, we are all thinking that instead of giving every week one assignment, sir, can you please give uh, one assignment in every 2 weeks, sir, because we need
Or
time, sir.
assignment every 2 weeks, is it? Okay. Or what about reduce? We'll talk about this later. Okay, after the class, we'll talk about this. We'll discuss
Okay,
more about this. Okay.
okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. So let me share the screen. Uh, okay. Are you guys able to see the white sheet, the blank sheet of paper? You should be able to see it now, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So let us get started. Uh, the title of today's lecture is the gyroscope and its applications. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to wrap this up within an hour, after which we would have half an hour, during which time we can discuss about the homework and about any other general questions that you might have in connection with the material that we have discussed so far. Okay, so as far as the gyroscope is concerned, at the heart of a gyroscope is a spinning wheel. Okay, so why do we have the spinning wheel? As we have discussed all along, if you spin a wheel, it develops an angular momentum. Okay, and that angular momentum therefore has a certain direction and a certain magnitude, and it requires some torque to change that angular momentum. So this torque that you need to apply can either tell you something about the rate of change of direction of a vehicle upon which this spinning wheel has been mounted, or it can be used in other ways. It can be used as a compass and so on and so forth, as we will see in today's lecture. But at the heart of everything is the spinning wheel. And the significance of the spinning wheel is that a spinning wheel has an angular momentum about its longitudinal, about its axis of symmetry, and that angular momentum gives it a certain direction in space. Okay, so even when it is mounted on some other object, it tries to maintain the direction, and one needs to apply torque, just as one needs to apply force to change the direction or change the magnitude of a moving object. One needs to therefore apply torque to change the direction or magnitude of a spinning wheel. Okay, so the spinning wheel is used in various different applications exactly for the same purpose. Okay, I want to start off with a slightly unconventional example, something that you would not expect, but perhaps you also know it. I don't know. Let me show this thing. Okay, are you able to see the screen here? Are you able to see this PowerPoint slide? Can
Yes, sir.
someone?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes.
Yes,
sir.
sir.
What do you see? You see a very famous opening sequence, right, of James Bond, and you see James Bond shooting his gun at a circular hole, and around the hole there are these helical grooves. It looks like we don't know what that exactly is. Have you guys ever wondered what this is? Does anybody know? So you see these black things that look like spirals, right, that finally converge to the central circle. Maybe I will use my arrow to show that these things here.
I think
Okay,
these are used to give spin to bullets.
pardon me.
This used to give spin to bullets.
Exactly. So this is called as rifling. Okay. So these are grooves that are what you are looking at here. I don't know if how many of you knew before this. I certainly did not. What you are looking at here is James Bond seen through the barrel of a gun. And what the black stuff around James Bond is actually the inside of a gun. inside of the gun's barrel, and these helical grooves, these spiral-like grooves that you see, is what is known as rifling. Okay, and there's a better image of that in the next slide. So as the bullet exits the barrel of the gun, this rifling, these grooves that exist on the inside of the gun's barrel impart a spin to the bullet. Okay, how fast is that spin? It's incredibly fast. It gets the bullet to spin at the rate of around 300,000 RPM. So each second, therefore, it's spinning 5,000 times about itself. Okay, that's the kind of angular rotation that is given about the axis of the bullet, and the purpose of doing this is to make sure that the bullet maintains its pointing direction. Okay, so this is one example, and it's not just bullets. This is done in various circumstances. It's done for cannons, for example. So this is a fairly old technology. It has been used, even in connection with, I think, archery. So you want to maintain the pointing direction of an arrow. Therefore, when you're releasing the arrow, you have rifling somewhere in the bow. Of course, the detailed construction is something that I'm not familiar with. But again, this rifling gets the arrow to spin about its axis and therefore maintain its pointing direction. There's one other way to get the arrow to point in a particular direction, and that's by using feathers at the back. But that's something that we must have all seen. But there's an alternate way to do it, and that's by spinning the arrow. And in the gun or a cannon or any such projectile that is used in modern day warfare, this is the main technique that is used to make sure that the bullet stays pointed at the target and does not deviate from it, and make sure that the sharpest part of the bullet is the one that enters the target first. Okay, so here is one unconventional example where the spin imparted to the object is used to maintain its orientation. But that's more generally true for all applications of a spinning wheel or a spinning cylindrically symmetric object. And we shall now discuss, we shall revisit our discussion on the free gyroscope. So in a free gyroscope, as I discussed earlier, you have a spinning wheel. I shall draw that here. Okay, and this is the axis about which the wheel is spinning, and this axis is mounted on what is known as, this wheel is mounted on what is known as a gimbal that allows for this wheel to spin freely about its axis. So this is one gimbal. Okay, and then this gimbal is in turn connected to a second gimbal. Okay, so maybe I'll draw it like this. You should imagine this in 3D. Otherwise, it's tough to get a picture of what I'm drawing here. But you can also look up the free gyroscope in Wikipedia or some other resource. So, and the second gimbal is connected to the vehicle upon which this gyroscope is mounted. So what is done here is that, just a moment, I'll just get back to the meeting screen. Yes. So what is done here is that you spin this wheel at a very high speed, omega s, and therefore it maintains its pointing direction. So suppose I am on the ground. Okay, the vehicle upon which I have mounted this gyroscope is called as a free gyroscope, by the way, free gyro. The reason it's called a free gyro is because I cannot apply torque on this wheel. If you see, I have these bearings which decouple rotational motion about all the three axes, of the main vehicle with respect to the wheel. Okay, that's why it's called as a free gyro. Now, let us say the vehicle upon which it is mounted is initially on the ground and it is fixed. Okay, I set this wheel spinning, and that therefore defines a certain direction for its angular momentum. Okay, now when the vehicle has departed, it could be a land-based vehicle, it could be an airplane, whatever it is, it could be a missile. When it has left the ground, or when it has left its initial position, because this gyroscope is always maintains this pointing direction, in some sense you are taking along with you in that vehicle a small piece of your inertial coordinate system. Because initially this was on the ground, everything was stationary, and we got this wheel to spin in a particular direction. And by virtue of the way the wheel has been mounted by using these gimbals, you cannot change its direction for any future time. Okay, so when the vehicle starts to move, it has inside it a tiny piece of the ground in some sense, or in other words, a coordinate frame that is aligned with the inertial coordinate system. So when the wheel, when the vehicle moves about, I can the orientation of the vehicle's frame. This is the vehicle's frame. Okay, that this arrow, this grounding that I have put, this the vehicles. This is fixed to the vehicle. Okay, when it moves about, this angle changes. Okay, so this is theta z, and likewise this angle can also change. This is theta y. So by measuring these two angles, these are essentially Euler angles, I can tell the orientation of the vehicle, the orientation about two axes of the vehicle. And if I use one more such gyroscope aligned differently with respect to the first one, the two Euler angles I get from that can help me, work out the orientation in 3D. Here I got a theta z and theta y. So let us say I align this differently, and I align this to be along another axis, then I may be able to get theta z and theta x with the second gyroscope. So from these two, by putting these the data, the measurements from these two gyroscopes together, I can tell the Euler angles of the orientation of the coordinate frame fixed to the vehicle with respect to the coordinate frame fixed to the ground. Okay, so I know the heading direction, the rotation matrix R of B relative to A from these three measurements. Okay, so this is what is known as a free gyroscope. As I said, when this ideally this is how it is supposed to operate, but then let us say when the vehicle is turning, okay, so as theta z is changing, then these bearings here will apply some small torque on this structure because of non-ideality, because of friction and so on. And that torque, if you see, if this experiences a torque in this direction, it will start to spin in the orthogonal direction. Okay, this is what we call as gyroscopic motion, right? When you have a torque about one axis, you have rotation about another axis, and that causes this wheel to precess. And that is an undesired motion of this free gyroscope. We don't want that to happen. So therefore, the lifetime over which these effects start to dominate the operation of the gyroscope is only a few minutes. So a free gyroscope in reality is not a very useful device. It is used apparently in missiles, where the time of flight is only a few minutes, and it has to stay functional. It has to stay accurate and point in the original direction only for a few minutes time, and that is possible for such short-lived vehicles. Okay. More generally, in order to avoid this problem of drift, as it is called, due to friction and other non-idealities, you do not use the gyroscope in the configuration that has been shown here. You instead try to constrain it in one way or another, so that that constraint does away with the spurious effects of precision and so on that would happen if you do not constrain it. Okay, so we will talk about, so whatever we would talk about next is what is known as the constrained gyro. Okay, not a free gyro. A free gyro can also, yes, any question?
Sir, just this free gyro, some issues there with regard to bearings. Can you just explain a little actually again here?
Okay, so let me explain. See, let us say the vehicle is turning about theta z. Okay, so this vehicle's frame is rotating with respect to this other gimbals at a certain rate theta dot z. Okay, so there is a relative motion between the gimbal and the vehicle's frame, and that relative motion results in a torque about the z axis. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay, so the torque is therefore going to be aligned along the z axis, and that torque, if you see, this wheel is spinning along this direction. Okay, let us call this the y direction. The torque is aligned along the z direction, and therefore this wheel is going to be set into motion about the y direction. Sorry, about the x direction, like that.
Yeah, I got. Yeah, got it.
That is precision. That's called precision, right? So this spurious cross-axis motion is exclusively because of the friction torque tau z. Okay, that's a non-ideality. So therefore, so after a while, this will stop pointing in the direction of in which it was initially aligned. Okay, you wanted to use this as a compass in some sense, because you hope that this wheel is going to maintain the pointing direction for all future time. But because of that happens, the other axis, it will no longer maintain that direction. So the length of time for which it maintains direction is only a few minutes, and whatever applications are possible in those few minutes of its use are all that is possible with a free gyro.
Okay, okay. But sir, nowadays we are not using na constraint gyro only we are using.
Constraint gyro is the main. It's not that we are not using free gyro. It is used, but only in certain niche applications, as I said, in
But sir,
missiles and so on.
in sir, our launch vehicle and all, we are not using constraint gyro only. We are using. We are not using free gyro. This old, old technique.
Right. So, I mean, a constraint gyro addresses all the problems of the free gyro, but it is still maybe a cheaper in construction or whatever. So I've read that it is used, so maybe not in a vehicle. There also the time of flight is not in minutes; it will be much larger. But it is possible to use this in missiles where the time of use is really small. Okay. So now let us come to the constraint gyro. So the constraint gyro, let me construct it. Sometimes the constraint gyro won't even have these two gimbals, okay, which allow for rotation about two separate axes. It will allow for rotation only about one axis. So let me draw its schematic here. Okay, so here is the wheel. This is the axis of the wheel, and then here is the bearing, and this is the gimbal, and this gimbal is connected directly to the vehicle. Okay, so I shall draw a fairly long shaft here because I want to introduce some elements here, and then this is connected to the vehicle. So I'm putting this as ground. This is not yet a constraint gyro, except that it, of course, it is a constraint gyro in some sense because you don't have two gimbals. It cannot rotate about the z-axis. Yeah, I mean, for rotations about the z-axis get transmitted to the gyroscope. There's no way to decouple the gyroscope from rotations about the z-axis because the second gimbal is absent here. So in that sense, it's already a constraint gyro. There are further constraints that we will introduce, and I will talk about that in a minute. Okay. So as I said, this wheel is set spinning about its symmetry axis, and that imparts an angular momentum here, which is given by I0z omega s. That is aligned along the length of the wheel, aligned along the symmetry axis of that cylindrical wheel. Now, this is mounted on a vehicle. Okay. Suppose the vehicle is turning about the z-axis. Okay. So suppose it is turning about this particular axis at a rate omega z. Okay, so if you recollect, this problem is not very different from the problem of your spinning swash plate, with the exception of the angles and the appearance of the bearings, etc., are different. But at the end of the day, what happens is because I'm spinning it about omega z. So if you look at from the top view, let us say this is the y-axis, sorry, let this be the x-axis. Okay, and this is the y-axis of the B1 coordinate system, YB1, and then this is ZB1, which is also coincident with the A coordinate systems axis. So let us say I look at it from top. Okay, there is XB1 here, YB1 here, and the wheel would look like a rectangle if I view it from top, and its angular momentum would be pointed along the XB1 direction. Okay. Now, when I try to rotate this entire B1 frame about the inertial frame at a rate omega z, what will happen then? Then this wheel, this angular momentum vector will at the next instant try to point in that direction, and therefore there's a change in angular momentum which is given by the tiny arrow there, and you see that it's pointed along the y-axis, right? So there will be a torque experience, therefore, about the y-axis. Now, suppose I arrest the motion of this assembly about the y-axis by using a spring, a torsional spring. So I introduce a torsional spring somewhere here. Okay, so the torsional spring constant is, let us say, K, Ks or something, K subscript S. Okay, now because I'm experiencing a torque omega z cross of H in the Hg in the B1 coordinate system. This is also in the B1 coordinate. This is the coordinate system where all the vectors are fixed, right? Numerically, you would see that this is nothing but I0z omega s times omega z, and it is pointed along the y-axis. Okay, that's going to be the direction of this torque. Okay, now if this is a torque experience, and that's going to twist the spring, this torsional spring. So the angle by which that spring is going to get twisted, let us say I call that as theta subscript s. That's given by Ks times theta subscript s. So I apply a torque, then by definition a spring deforms in proportion to the torque, and the proportionality constant, of course, is the stiffness of the spring. So the torsional stiffness in this case, and that I have called it as Ks. So the angle theta s by which that spring is going to twist in response to this torque is given by this expression. And from here I get that theta s is equal to I0z omega s divided by Ks times omega z. So you see, therefore, that by measuring this theta s, so let us say I have a potentiometer or some such electrical instrument from which I can measure the angle by which this compliant torsional spring has twisted, then that measurement is directly proportional to the rate at which the vehicle was spinning about its yaw axis. In other words, it's proportional to omega z. And therefore, this kind of a gyroscope is called as a rate gyro, because it measures the angular rate about one axis, namely the z axis. Okay. Any questions about this? So if I have three such gyros arranged orthogonal to one another, I can measure the angular rate about the x-axis, about the y-axis, and about the z-axis independently. Yeah, Subhadeep Sahu has a question.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon.
Yeah, hi.
Yes, sir. You have told that theta s is proportional to theta z. So
Yes.
how we came to know that it is proportional? It's because of it is related with omega z, right?
The theta s is not proportional to theta z. Theta s is proportional to omega z.
Okay.
Not theta z.
Okay.
Is this equation clear to you?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Any other question?
Sir, is it theta s theta dot? Because we are talking about rate gyro. So this is the angle, right? Theta s.
It is theta s. Rate gyro measures the angular rate omega z. So if you want to call this as theta z dot, okay, a rate gyro measures theta z dot. That's why it's called as a rate gyro. It's a rate of change of angle theta z. That's what is being measured here. Okay. I'm measuring theta s, which is a fixed quantity, and that quantity is proportional to the angular frequency about the z-axis, which is omega z, and I represent it here as theta dot z. Okay.
Yes, and we are only interested in the theta s, right? Because theta z dot is something that the body is.
No, we want to know how much. We want to know the yaw rate of the body, let us say. Then by measuring theta s, we will be able to know at what rate the body is yawing. So at what rate the body is rotating about the z-axis.
Oh, okay. So theta z dot is output variable for this device.
Ah, correct. Yes, that's what you want to measure. That's the output. And theta s reads out theta dot z.
Okay, sir. Got it.
Okay. So in all the applications of constraint gyros, this is the central principle. There is a rotation about one axis or a torque about one axis, and there is a corresponding complementary effect on about the perpendicular. So there are three axes. One is the axis of the spin itself. the other two axes are the axis of importance. One is the input axis, other is the output axis. In this case, the input axis is the z axis, and the input here is the angular rate omega z, and that results in a torque about the y axis, the other orthogonal axis, and that torque is used in the case of the right gyro. It twists a certain torsional spring, and therefore that amount of twist will read out the rate at which the vehicle is turning about the z axis. Now let us say we make a slight modification to the same thing with just a very small modification. I'll just draw this again. Okay, so you have your gimbal here. And again, I'm connecting this first gimbal to the vehicle's frame. Okay. Now let us revisit the same-ish problem. Okay, I now rotate about the z-axis at a rate omega z or theta dot z. Okay. Now instead of putting a torsional spring here, let us say I put a damper. So I am indicating the damper by means of these three blades here, and that these blades will be inside a fluid medium, so they will end up damping, the motion, any relative motion of the shaft with respect to the vehicle. Okay. So there is a damper here. Let this call a damper, torsional damper with damping coefficient B. Okay. Then what happens? That same torque which we are experiencing, if the angular momentum is I0z omega s, then the torque that is applied along the z-axis, that is experienced about the y-axis, is going to again be I0z omega s times omega z. Same torque, no difference, when the vehicle is spinning at omega z, and this will now be equal to the damping coefficient B times theta dot, I'll call this as theta dot B. Okay, so angular rate of that damper with respect to the vehicle. Okay, now I know that omega z, as I said, is nothing but the rate of change of orientation about the z axis, so it's theta dot z. So I0z omega s times theta dot z is equal to B times theta dot B, or in other words, I0z omega s divided by B times theta dot z is equal to theta dot B. Okay. So therefore, what I would get then is, if I were to integrate this, I would get that I0z omega s by B times integral theta dot z dt is equal to integral theta dot B dt over a certain duration of time, capital 0 to capital T, let us say. Okay. So therefore, if I call this as delta theta z, which is the change of angle that has happened over the duration of capital T, then this times I0z omega s by B is equal to delta theta B. Okay, the change in that angle of that shaft, with respect to the vehicle. So this, therefore, if instead of measuring, the theta s as it happened in the previous case, if I measure the change in angle of this shaft, then that change in angle will give me the net change in direction of the spacecraft or the vehicle about the z-axis. Okay, so this kind of a gyro which measures angle instead of angle rate is called as a rate integrating gyro. Why is it called rate integrating is obvious from this expression here, right? So it's called as a rate integrating gyro. Okay. So any questions about how the rate gyro and the rate integrating gyro work? They both possess the same geometry, with the exception that the torque that is experienced on account of the motion of that vehicle upon which they are mounted, in this case is resisted by a damper in the case of the rate integrating gyro, and in case of the rate gyro it is resisted by a spring. And the angle change that results as a consequence of this is either the angle, yes, in both cases it's the angle change. In one case it reads out the absolute change in angle of that vehicle about the z-axis, absolute rotation of the vehicle about the z-axis. In the other case it reads out the rotation rate theta dot z. Okay. Now let us stick with the same geometry, but let us not apply any constraint whatsoever along the y-axis. Earlier, we first applied a spring constraint. Next, we applied a damping constraint. Let us say we apply no constraint whatsoever. Let us see what happens. I'm going to draw this again. It's the bearing. So this is XB1. This is ZB1. This is YB1. Okay. Now, suppose we don't apply any constraint whatsoever. What happened? We got this to spin about the z-axis at some rate omega z. As a consequence of that, this disk experienced a torque about the y-axis. Okay, that torque was resisted by either a spring or a damper in the previous two cases. But suppose we put no resistive, nothing resists it. See, this entire structure is free to rotate about the axis, right? Because this the way we have mounted the second bearing allows for rotation about the z-axis with respect to the vehicle, right? So what will happen then? Over a period of time, this disk will gradually tilt about the y-axis, and as it tilts about the y-axis, so if we were to draw this in the xz plane, so this is ZB1 and this is XB1. Initially, our angular momentum was pointed in this direction. Okay, but because we did not resist the torque, it starts to rotate about the y-axis, and therefore it will start to point this way, and then after some time it will start to point that way. Now, as it approaches the z-axis, you see that the angle between these two is reducing, so that cross product of omega z with the angular momentum vector becomes smaller and smaller. Ultimately, when the angular momentum vector is aligned along the z-axis, the angle between the angular momentum vector and the omega z vector are now 0. So this torque is no longer experienced. The moment, this angular momentum is rotated about the y-axis from its initial orientation to the final orientation, which is pointed along the z-axis. Now, this vector will stay put at this, in this direction for all future time, as long as the angular velocity is only along the z-axis. Any questions about this?
Yes, sir. Sir, could you please repeat that this one?
The argument, is it?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So suppose we have the vehicle upon which this has been mounted. This instrument has been mounted is rotating about the z-axis at an angular rate omega z. Then do you agree with me that this wheel is going to experience a torque about the y-axis? Is that clear to you?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Oh, okay. Now, the gimbals in such a way that they can rotate freely about the y-axis. There is no spring constraint, or there is no fixture or damper or whatever to resist the torque about the y-axis. So therefore, the torque is going to change the angular momentum about the y-axis, and that's what I'm plotting here. So the y-axis here is into the plane of the paper. This is ZB1, this is XB1. On account of the torque that you're experiencing because of the spinning motion about the z-axis, the angular momentum vector is going to gradually rotate, and finally about the y-axis because of the torque about the y-axis, and finally it's going to align with the z-axis. Now in this orientation, that omega z cross I0z omega z, these two vectors are aligned with respect to one another, so the cross product will go to 0. So there will be no further torque that this system is going to experience because of rotation about the z-axis. Is that also clear to you?
Yes, sir. Now clear. Okay.
Sir,
so
that means now omega. Sir, one question.
Yes.
Sir, now omega is aligned with omega z. Is it true?
Exactly. Omega s and omega z will be aligned with one another.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Correct. So this will not move at all for all future time as long as the vehicle stays put spinning about the z-axis at the rate omega z. Now, what is the use of this particular contraption? Suppose the vehicle on which we have mounted this is our own dear planet, Mother Earth. In that case, we know that Earth is spinning about its axis at the rate of 1 revolution per day. And suppose this device is held at the equator. So this is the Earth, and it is, let us say, spinning about this axis, okay, at the rate of omega z. And I have this gyro. I'm standing on the equator, and I'm holding this gyro, this entire thing. I'm just drawing it as an arrow there. If you give it some time, because of Earth's rotation, this wheel is slowly going to precess about the y-axis, and finally, the initial angular momentum was, suppose, perpendicular to the local ground. Yes, so it's aligned along this particular direction. This wheel will eventually turn and point in this particular direction along the axis of rotation of Earth. Okay, so this wheel will therefore point towards what is called as the true north. So there are two north poles. One is the magnetic north, which is the north as indicated by a magnet. Okay, so a magnetic north is not aligned in general with the true north. In fact, magnetic north's direction changes depending on the the dynamics of that are happening underneath the ground. Okay, so there are all these huge convective currents of rocks, molten rocks, etc., that is going on inside the ground, and that decides that those convective current directions decide the directions of the magnetic field around the Earth. Okay, so the magnetic field direction actually has changed substantially with time. Sometimes even the poles reverse. What was a north pole today and south pole today becomes south. Then what was north pole today becomes south pole several thousand years from now. So the direction of the magnetic north-south is not at all correlated with the direction of the north-south associated with the Earth's spin about itself. Okay, what the gyroscope does now, it is now a new instrument. Okay, unlike a magnet, which only points towards the magnetic north-south, a gyroscope helps you point towards the true north. Okay, which is defined by Earth's spin about its axis. Now, what is the use of this kind of a pointing direction? This is, since it always points towards a true north, this is called as a gyro compass. Okay, so what is the use of a gyro compass? Let us say you are a miner. Okay, you have dug into the ground. You don't have stars or any other terrestrial landmarks to tell you anything about your orientation, how you are located with respect to the planet. Okay, so the visual cues associated with maybe the North Star or some other thing is gone. Now, if you are a miner, you don't know what kind of rocks you have around you. These rocks could have iron in them. There could be magnetic. There could, I don't know the name of the particular mineral that's magnetite or something, right? So there could be magnetite rocks around you. So there could be magnetic fields generated by those rocks, which can completely skew up any reading that you might get from a magnetic compass. Okay, if the magnetic effects are small, then you can use a magnetic compass, but you are not guaranteed, because the rocks around you are surrounded by rocks. Some of them may be magnetic. There might be iron-containing minerals around. So you cannot therefore rely on the directions indicated to you by a magnetic compass. And that is where the gyro compass comes to the rescue. Because regardless of where you are, whether you are underneath the ground or wherever else, give it sufficient time, it will always point towards the true north. Okay, so you can use that to precisely tell where you are with respect to the surface or anywhere else by using the gyro compass. Of course, I have used a single gimbal gyro, and this works perfectly fine and points towards the true north only along the equator. If you are at a different latitude, then you will have to use either a two gimbal gyro, or you have to use two separate single gimbal gyros oriented differently with respect to one another to correctly have an idea of what the direction of the true north of Earth is. But still that can be done, and therefore the gyro compass is widely used by the mining industry to get idea of their orientation when they are deep inside the ground and have no other way of knowing it. Any questions about this? Okay, so far we have seen how the gyroscope can be used. It's an invaluable tool as a sensor. It can by using the spinning effect, we can use it for sensing angular rate. We can use it as a compass. We can use it to sense absolute angular changes, rate gyro, rate integrating gyro, a gyro compass. Then the free gyro also is useful in its own set of applications. Now let us see how we can use it as an actuator. All along we provided an angular change, and that torque was experienced, was measured. But suppose we want to generate a torque. Okay, so let us, here is one example in which the same gyroscope, a constrained gyroscope, is used to generate torque. So let us say the gyro wheel is now pointed along the vertical direction. Okay, and then I have my first gimbal this way. Okay, and then I have just a moment. I have connected this to a motor. Rather than allowing it to freely move, I have connected this to a motor here. Okay, so this is a bearing and this is the ground, and on the other side it is connected to a motor. So the angular momentum I0 z omega s is in this direction. Okay, and this is the x-axis. Let us say this is the y-axis, and that's the z-axis. So this is xb1, yb1, zb1. Okay, here the zb1 and zb are coincident. Now suppose I intentionally rotate the motor about the x-axis at a certain rate. What will happen to the motor? So if I were to look in the zy plane, okay, so yb1 and zb1 I'm drawing here. Initially the angular momentum vector is aligned along the z-axis, but I started to rotate the motor about the x-axis at a certain rate. Okay, so when I rotate the motor, what will happen is angular momentum vector will naturally change direction, and this direction change is therefore aligned along the y-axis, the negative y-axis to be precise. Okay, so because this is I need to apply a torque along the negative y-axis to change this. This motor is going to experience the chassis of the motor is going to experience an equal and opposite reaction torque. Okay, so that torque therefore is going to be aligned along the y-axis. So if I try to spin the motor at a rate, let us say theta dot x, then the torque that I'm going to generate is given by I0 z omega z, that's the angular momentum, times theta dot x. That's the torque that I'm going to generate about the y-axis. Okay, so this torque is aligned along the y-axis, and now I can use this torque to cancel any other disturbance torque that my vehicle may be experiencing. So here is one concrete example of that. This is used routinely in cancelling the rolling motion of ships. Okay, so let me draw as faithfully as possible. I'm not a good artist. A ship or a yacht. Okay, so this is a ship, and the axis, along its width, I'll call that the x-axis. Along its length, the roll axis is the y-axis, and along the yaw axis is of course a z-axis. Right, now I have my motor with its shaft aligned along the x-axis, and my spinning wheel is aligned along the z-axis. So when I turn the motor intentionally, then I generate a torque about the y-axis, which has been given by, as I said, I0 z omega s times theta dot x. Now, at the instant that this torque is applied, suppose this ship is being buffeted by waves, right? The ship is in water, which is choppy water, right? So suppose it is already experiencing, if I draw this in cross section, let us say the ship looks something like this in cross section. So this is the x-axis and this is the z-axis. Okay, because of the waves, the ship is going to experience a torque because of the up and down motion of the waves about the y-axis, about the roll axis, and that causes huge rolling motion for the ship. Now, if I'm able to sense this rolling motion, I generate now a torque that's exactly equal and this particular torque by using my gyro. Okay, then I cancel that torque generated by the gyro will cancel the torque that has been generated by that choppy water, and therefore that together they prevent the ship from rolling about too much. Okay, so this is called as an anti-roll gyro. Any questions about this? The same principle, we are using it, we are just putting it to different uses. That's all. So let me show you a couple of videos of anti-roll gyros in action. Just a moment. So I'd opened this, but I think it's now gone. Okay, I think I'll just fast forward it to some point. Yes, just watch this video for a few seconds. So the ship on the left-hand side doesn't have any gyro. And look at the extent by which it is rolling about. The ship on the right-hand side, however, has a gyro built into it. Okay, and you can see that the amount of rolling has been reduced by almost 90%. And this compares here the extent by which one ship is longitudinal axis and the extent by which the other one is rolling. And this other roll is not rolling because of the cancellation of the torque applied by the hydrodynamic forces by using the gyroscope, the anti-roll gyro. Okay, the construction of this is in another video. I'll just show that also. This guy here. Just a moment. Are you able to see the next video?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay, let us wait for a minute. It might come up. Okay, it is not coming. Okay, let me exit this in that case. Let us not spend more time on this. Let us get back to our discussion. I will send you the link to these videos so that you can watch them separately. Do you now see my screen or not yet? Do you see my paper?
Not yet, sir.
Not yet. Not yet. Let us wait for a minute. I'll see if I don't know why this is not getting updated. Should I stop sharing the screen and then try to share it again? Shall I try that? I'll see if I've never done this before.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I will try to share the screen again. Okay. You should be able to see my paper now, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now let us continue. I will not show that video because it's just showing how the gyro works. I'll just send a link to that video. Okay, but it's quite impressive how much it was able to avoid this rolling motion and therefore add to the comfort of traveling in a ship. or a yacht. Okay, there's a small problem, however, which is not very relevant for the case of a ship, but is relevant in other situations. Let us consider the same anti-roll gyro. So let us say I'm drawing in the this is the y-axis, okay, and this is z-axis. Then what happens? Initially the angular momentum is oriented along the z-axis, right? This is I0z omega s. Now, when the motor turns the angular momentum vector about the x-axis, about this axis in other words, then the angular momentum will start to point in this direction after some time. Okay. Now, the torque is not exactly along the y-axis anymore because it's omega, omega x cross the angular momentum. It will be perpendicular to both the angular momentum vector and the omega vector. And in other words, therefore, the torque will therefore be in this direction. Earlier, it was in that direction. But now, when the angular momentum is pointed this way, it is in that direction. Now, the rolling motion is happening only about the y-axis. But the torque I am generating now has an undesired component, cross-axis component, a component about the z-axis also. Is this clear? So when we have rotated by some amount, the torque will no longer be aligned along the y-axis, but instead we will have a component along the z-axis as well. Now, this torque, firstly, is not a very large component, provided this angle by which I have rotated is small. And often, the reason we use anti-roll gyro is to compensate for this periodic back and forth rolling motion of a ship. There is this random or partially periodic disturbance torque that is applied by the hydrodynamic forces. I have to cancel that. So this theta will never become really large. It will keep rocking back and forth about theta equal to 0. Okay, so it is not a major issue for ships. The second reason this Z component, which is not desired, is not a major issue is because the moment of inertia of the ship about the Z-axis is much larger than its moment of inertia about X-axis. If you see, the ship is like a long, slender cylinder. So the moment of inertia about the Y-axis is therefore very, very small. All the mass is concentrated in a small region about the Y-axis. However, the ship looks like a long stick about the Z-axis. So the moment of inertia there is very large. So the small torque about the Z-axis really doesn't accelerate it too much about the Z-axis. It doesn't change the orientation too much about the Z-axis. So that's also one reason why anti-roll gyros don't worry too much about this spurious Z-axis component. But still, we can compensate for this component also. How do we compensate for this component? Here's a very neat, clever idea. Let us say instead of just using one gyroscope, one anti-roll gyro, I use two anti-roll gyros. Okay, and the second anti-roll gyro I mount on the other side. Okay, and I spin the wheel in the opposite direction. Okay, so this is the second one. This is the YB1 axis, and this is a ZB1 axis, and the X is of course out of the plane of the paper. But this time I spin this wheel in the opposite direction, so the angular momentum initially will be pointed down instead of it being pointed up. Okay, and when I have to generate torque, I at the same time simultaneously spin both the gyros, anti-roll gyros, but one of them is spun in the counterclockwise direction, the first one that we talked about up to this point, and this new one is spun in the clockwise direction, in the opposite direction. Okay, so the angular momentum is negative to what it was for the first gyro. The spin direction is also negative to what it was for the first gyro. So the cross product of these two vectors will still continue to be along the y-axis in the neighborhood of theta equal to 0. But then what happens is that because of this clockwise rotation of the second gyro, after some time the angular momentum will point in this particular direction. Okay, and therefore the torque will be in that direction, perpendicular to the angular momentum vector and the the rotation vector, which is along the x-axis. So torque will be in this direction. It will be also aligned at an angle theta if these two are operated in an exactly identical manner. Okay, now the net effect, the felt by the ship, felt by that structure on which both these have been mounted, is the vector sum of these two torques. the torque that is aligned that way and a torque aligned this way. And if these two gyros are identical in every sense, in their construction and the rate at which they have turned and the rate at which the wheels have been spun and so on, these two vectors are equal in magnitude. And they're mirror images of one another about the YB1 axis. So when I add the two, the Z components cancel one another and the X components, sorry, the Y components reinforce. They become double in length, the overall torque. Okay. So therefore, with this arrangement, I can generate pure torques along the Y-axis, even though the angular momentum vector of each of them is pointed not exactly along the Z-axis. Any questions about this? This is a very clever engineering solution to this problem. Okay. So why is this? Where is this important? This is not important in a ship because, as I said, this component, the Z component, cross-axis component, is actually a small number, firstly. And secondly, the moment of inertia of the ship is really large for rotations about the Z-axis. So this component will not result in any appreciable change in orientation of the ship about the Z-axis. But in a spacecraft, that's not the case. You cannot make all these assumptions in the case of a spacecraft, right? So if I just mount a single anti-roll gyro in a spacecraft, of course, there the purpose is not to cancel any rolling motion imposed by waves or something. There is no atmosphere there. You want to rotate the spacecraft by a certain angle, let us say. Okay. Earlier, we introduced reaction wheels as one way whereby that rotation can be executed. The other way by which the rotation can be executed is by using a gyroscope, a spinning wheel, and changing the direction of the spinning wheel to generate a torque. And the torque will result in rotation. Okay. So when the exact same device is applied in space, it has a new name. It's called as a control moment gyro, CMG. Okay. In space, however, you cannot, accept this spurious Z-axis component. You want it to rotate about one axis, you better make sure it rotates about that axis, because there's nothing preventing the spacecraft from resisting, from also rotating about the Z-axis on account of the spurious component. You will end up rotating it about axis which you did not want it to rotate about. Okay. So in such a situation, therefore, having two gyroscopes spinning opposite to one another and being turned in opposite directions helps you generate torque only about one axis and therefore rotate the spacecraft only about that particular axis. Okay. I have a video that shows this. There's other also very interesting consequences of having two gyros. Let us say the wheel speed starts to reduce with time because of friction or some such thing. If the construction is identical, the hope is that both these wheels will gradually, their speeds will reduce in very similar manner. Now, suppose I have a motor that revs up the wheel again back to its original spin frequency. I need to apply a torque aligned along the Z-axis for that motor, for that wheel to continue to spin at a high speed. Now, if I have two wheels spinning at equal and opposite directions, the torque applied to rev up the first wheel will be equal and opposite to the torque applied to rev up the second wheel. So both the wheels, we can increase the speed without affecting the spacecraft in any particular way, right? So therefore, this is a very useful configuration, and this is what is used in spacecraft. It's called as a control moment gyro. I have another YouTube video which shows that. Let us see if I can play that. Just a moment. I'm very sorry, there's some ad that's come up here. Oh. Looks like, yeah, I can skip ads. So here, I'll just make this full screen. So what you are seeing here are these two wheels on either ends of this spacecraft. That cross mark thing are the solar panels of the spacecraft, and there are these two wheels. Those dark circles on either side are the two wheels of that spinning gyro, and you can see them spinning, right? then when you change the direction, the spacecraft's orientation about that longitudinal axis can be changed by using these two wheels. Okay, so these two are together comprise the control moment gyro. Okay, any questions about this? If not, then let us go back to the last topic. We are done with discussing the the applications of gyroscopes in various fields. What we shall now do is look at the effect of gravity on all these rotations that we have been talking about so far. Just give me a minute.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I have a question regarding the control moment gyro.
Sir,
you told that in case of ships, we are just doing back and forth of the rotation and getting small angle rotated about the y-axis. So in case of the flights, sorry sir, in case of the spacecraft, what I have told lastly that while rotating that at a particular, we are rotating fully now. So the momentum vector means that is the angular momentum vector that will rotate fully along the x-axis, right?
Fully about the x-axis? No, that doesn't happen even there. It's only a small angle.
Why, sir?
Pardon me?
Sir, why is this happening?
Why only a small angle? Is it because you don't want to keep this spinning, right? See, if as long as a torque exists, this spacecraft will accelerate about the direction and keep spinning. But you actually want to only change its orientation by a certain angle. So you apply a torque to accelerate it, and then you make the torque 0 so that it decelerates. Sorry, it spins at a constant speed, and then you actually change the direction of the torque so that it decelerates, and then finally comes to 0. The angular velocity comes to 0. So for this entire thing to happen, you have to accelerate the spacecraft about y-axis, then decelerate it once the orientation has changed. That entire thing requires you to come back to the original orientation. Okay, you cannot have this continuously rotating about the x-axis.
Okay, sir. Okay, that's what I was asking.
Yeah. So the last topic we would be discussing is how these rotating flywheels, rotating discs, behave under the effect of gravity. So all along, what we have done, for example, when we took the case of the spinning swash plate, okay, the spinning swash plate we assumed was mounted such that its center was aligned with the center, the of a rotating shaft, and therefore the center of gravity was somewhere here. It was not that gravity was absent; it was probably present, but it did not have any effect on rotational motion because any moment that it applied was 0. Okay, but suppose instead of having this configuration, we were to move this disc away from the center of the axis of the shaft. Okay, so in other words, let us say the disc is somewhere here, and I have a shaft which is, of course, about which this disc is rotating at a speed of omega s, and this shaft is connected to our original vertical shaft, which is supported by bearings. Okay, and the angle between these two shafts is exactly theta as before in all the problems that we have been looking at. Okay, now let us say I have my first bearing here somewhere. Okay, second bearing, I intentionally put it at the intersection of these two things. I need not put them here. Okay, I can also put them somewhere else, but I want this to be connected to another problem, another physical problem. That's why I'm choosing to put the bearing here. You can also solve the problem when the bearing is not here, but for reasons that I just told you, I want to put the bearing, and there may be a thrust bearing here to counteract mg that is acting down. Okay. Now suppose as before, the shaft is spinning at a rate of omega z about the z-axis, and this is spinning at a rate of omega s with respect to the shaft. Now the question again boils down to determining the reaction forces F1 and F2 at the two bearings. Okay. To solve this problem, what I shall do is I shall choose the origin of my coordinate system to coincide with the point where these two shafts intersect, where the axis of these two shafts intersect. So I shall draw the XA, YA, ZA coordinate system here. Okay, so the XA coordinate system, so the inertial coordinate system is of course aligned with the axis of the shaft as before. So this is ZA, and the XA is this way, and YA is into the plane of the paper. Okay, so what about the intermediate coordinate system that is also situated here? Okay, so I will draw that here. So this is, if you see it from the top, XA is here and YA is here, and I will see the disk as a circle and slightly, not exactly a circle, and somewhat of an ellipse. And because it is rotating about the ZA axis, its position would be different. Okay, so the position will be somewhere here. So let us say this is the XB1 axis, and then perpendicular to that is the YB1 axis, and the ZB1 axis as before is coincident with ZB. Okay, now we come to the XB1 YB1 coordinate system. Okay, so this is XB1, YB1, so this is ZB1, let us say. Now we rotate the x-axis by an angle theta about the y-axis of the B1 coordinate system to get XB2. So these are all the Euler angles. So the first angle here is theta Z1 as before, which is omega z times t. The second angle is theta. So this is ZB2. And the final body fixed coordinate system, which is fixed to this red spinning object and is rotating along with it, will be that last Euler angle. So I'll just show you the top view of that. Okay, so maybe I should have drawn this probably in green color rather than in blue color, because the blue color I have reserved for the body, sorry, the inertial coordinate system. The last one is in the red color. So if you look at the top view of that, so I will have XB here and YB here, and this is XB1, XB2.
Sir, we can't see that, sir. That is below the camera.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. Okay. And the last angle is theta Z2 is equal to omega ST. So the rotation matrix again between B and A will be the same one. RZ of theta Z1, RY of theta, RZ of theta Z2. Okay. But the only difference here is that my origin, the coordinate system is not coincident with the center of mass, but is coincident with a fixed point about which the rigid body is rotating. You see, it's rotating about this axis as well as that axis. Section of these two axes is the point about which the rigid body is rotating. It's a fixed point. And if you remember, I can also apply the same Euler's equations about a fixed point as well. So I've chosen to apply it about that point. Now, this object, of course, in this case has been chosen to be a disk, but you can imagine that the analysis would be valid even if this is some symmetric object about that particular axis. Okay. The angular momentum, I shall write here. About this point O, which is the origin of this coordinate system, it's no longer G, right? About the point O, and I represent that as subscript O instead of subscript G. In the B1 coordinate system, I have chosen the B1 coordinate system because this angular momentum, angular velocity are fixed vectors in the B1 coordinate, exactly as in the previous examples. Okay, no difference. The only difference is in the location of the origin of the coordinate system. It will once again be the same expression, you know, I0z minus I0x times sine theta cos theta omega z. But this time I0z, I0x will be about that point O. So maybe I should put I0z O and I0x O or some such thing. Okay. And then, 0 and then I0 z cos square theta plus I0 x sin square theta about that point O, not about the center of mass times omega z. So this is the first component. And then the other component is the angular momentum due to spin, and that will be the same as before. Okay, it will be I0 z omega s sin theta, that's the x component. Y component will be 0, I0 z omega s cos theta as before. Okay, now the net torque, therefore, generated by this wheel will be once again the same expression. It will be about the y-axis, and that will be given by I0z minus I0x omega z square sin theta cos theta. Again, you need to remember that these moments of inertia are computed about the new origin, not about the center of mass. Plus I0z omega s omega z sin theta. That will be the net torque. Okay, and in this particular problem, you see that the center of mass is at the center of the wheel, and if this length of the shaft that connects the wheel to that pivot is L, then the torque applied by this weight mg is nothing but mg times L sin theta, and that will be again also along the y-axis. So if the spin rates omega z and omega s are kept constant, then this will be equal to mg L sin theta plus the torque applied by the reaction forces. Now, I have taken the bearing intentionally to coincide with the point of intersection of these two shafts. So one of the reaction forces F2 will have 0 moment about that point. The first reaction force F1, okay, let me call this capital L, the distance of that that bearing from the origin O. Then the moment of that is F1 times capital L, and that again is going to be aligned along the YB1 axis, because F1 is aligned along the XB1 axis and this L is aligned along the ZB1 axis. So their cross product R cross F will be aligned along the YB1 axis. So I'm just writing a scalar equation equating the Y components alone of the rate of change of angular momentum on the left hand side to the torque applied along the right hand side. So F1 times L. Any questions about this? Okay, very straightforward, very simple. Nothing, no, conceptually nothing new. Okay, from this I can get the reaction force F1. Okay, now the other reaction force F2 I can get by equating F1 plus F2 to the centrifugal force that this experiences. You know, this, because this is spinning about the center of mass is offset from the axis of about which this is rotating. This will experience a centrifugal force. So F1 plus F2 therefore should counteract its centrifugal force also. So from that I can get F2, but that is not very important for whatever we would discuss next. So let us come to this equation now. The question I ask, as I did before, is for what value of omega z is F1 equal to 0? Earlier I asked the question of what value of omega z are both the reaction forces F1 and F2 equal to 0, and that led us to the problem of the free symmetric top. Here I'm just interested in knowing for what value of omega z is F1 equal to 0. If F1 has to be equal to 0, then I need to have I0z minus I0x omega z square sin theta cos theta plus I0z omega s omega z sin theta to be equal to mgl sin theta. So you see that this is a quadratic equation in omega z. Okay, so it's omega z square times something plus omega z times something else is equal to something else. So it's of the kind A times omega z square plus B times omega z plus C is equal to 0. And I can solve this quadratic equation and obtain that particular value of omega z for which this reaction force F1 will be equal to 0. Now, what often happens in practice is that omega s will be spun at a much higher rate compared to omega z. I can solve that quadratic equation and obtain the answer. That is a right trial way to do it. But there's a simpler way to do it when the spin speed omega s is much greater than the precision speed omega z. If you look at this omega z square, omega z. So when omega s is much greater than omega z, do you agree with me that this second term here will be much bigger than the first term? Because this omega s, omega z, that's omega z square. And we have this inequality. Furthermore, I have I0z here and I0z minus I0x here. So this term here will also be much less than that term there. Therefore, on both these accounts, I can ignore this for all practical purposes compared to that one, when omega s is much greater than omega z. In which case, to get that particular omega z, although I need to solve that quadratic equation, I can get a very good approximation of it by simply using this equation. Omega s omega z sine theta is equal to mgl sine theta. Okay, so and that gives me omega z to be equal to mgl divided by I0z times omega s. Okay, so if I were to spin this shaft at this particular angular rate, then the reaction force F1 will be equal to 0. And what is the implication of that? If you see here, if the reaction force F1 is equal to 0, then we don't need that bearing. And when we don't have that bearing, and we have anyway not taken this shaft's mass into account, the vertical shaft's mass into account, this entire thing can be removed. And the picture reduces to something that looks like this. I have a spinning wheel which is spinning about a certain shaft at an angle theta. Okay, and there's a bearing at the bottom. Now, does this remind you of any familiar object? This is spinning about its axis at a rate omega s and about the z axis at a rate omega z, which is given by this particular equation. This is nothing but a top. Okay, a top that we have played with as children. This is what it is. Okay, and you see here that when you release a top and the angle at which it is spinning with respect to the vertical is non-zero, it also precesses about the vertical axis at a rate omega z given by this particular equation. Okay, and what is very interesting about this is that no matter at what angle theta this top is inclined with respect to the vertical, the rate at which it precesses is always the same. It's just given by this expression. Of course, it's an approximation. There is a dependence on theta that you would get if you use this expression, but for all practical purposes, that is a very small contributor, so we ignore its effect. So omega z is independent of theta. So no matter at what angle theta this top is inclined, it spins about a vertical direction, and that motion is called precession again. And this is called spin. It spins about a vertical axis at the same rate, omega z. So already there is one counterintuitive fact about a top, namely that if I have a top and if this were not spinning, what do you expect to happen? So if there is mg here, you expect this whole top to simply flip down, just fall down because of mg, right? But because it is spinning, because I've also imparted an angular momentum to it about its axis, it will not fall down. If I leave it at some angle theta, it stays put at close to that angle theta. It just starts to spin about the vertical axis at a certain constant rate, which is independent of the angle theta. Okay, so this is really a magical effect, and I will conclude this lecture with another YouTube video where a guy actually carries a very heavy object. So he has a rotor which is 18 kg in weight. Okay, and he holds it horizontally with just a single hand. He's able to do that only because he has imparted a certain angular velocity to that rotor. And because of that, that effect of gravity is counteracted by the precision of this, this heavy object about the vertical axis. He therefore doesn't need to feel that moment due to the weight that is suspended at 18 kg weight that is suspended some distance away from his arm. So I'll just let me show that video, and I'll be done with this class. Can you guys see my screen? Can someone unmute their mic and let me know?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what you see here is this very powerful guy, this Pelwan here, who is trying to lift this wheel. You are able to see a wheel that is connected to a shaft, right? He's trying to lift it, but as you will see, this very powerful guy is unable to lift it up, make it horizontal. He's trying hard, but he's unable to do it. Now this guy, the guy who is going to spin the wheel, he's far less strong compared to the other guy, the pale one. But yet what he does next is he gets it to spin. As you can see, someone is helping him spin that wheel at a very high speed. Okay, now this is a top. And now look at that, he releases his hand, one of the hands, and instead of falling down, this wheel will rotate about the vertical direction and will not flop down, and he's able to support the entire wheel with just one hand. A guy who was much more powerful than him couldn't support it with his one hand, but this guy is able to do it with just one hand, and this is the consequence of gyroscopic precision. And he shows this also in the context of a bicycle wheel. He shows that if you spin a bicycle wheel and release it, it will not flop to the ground. It will simply spin about the vertical direction, vertical axis at a certain constant rate. Okay, so this is a truly magical effect if you did not really know what is happening there, because you would intuitively expect the whole thing to flop down, but it doesn't happen because of the angular momentum that you have imparted to the wheel. Okay, so I'll stop at this point, and we can I can take questions. I can, if you have any questions about the material that we had discussed earlier, also I can answer that. I had intended to devote at least half an hour for that, but it ended up taking up the whole class. All the other things that I discussed ended up taking up the whole class. But I can answer those questions also, but a limited number of them, given that we are almost out of time. And then there was the homework, right? One student at the start wanted fewer homeworks. Can the student bring it up again? I forget his name now.
Yes, yes, I am Mukund Mitra. Good evening, sir.
Mukund. Good evening, Mukund. Yes, tell me.
Yes, sir. I was telling that some days before we were all facing the same issue only that we were discussing. The assignment questions they are very good questions, and sir, but it takes some time to solve those questions. So
okay.
and we are all falling short of time, sir, because there are so much of subjects and assignments for each subject. So what we want, sir, is that instead of giving one assignment every week, sir, every 2 weeks you give one assignment, sir. Then it will be better for us to solve those questions.
Okay. One assignment every 2 weeks is fine with me. What about a number of questions? Should I double questions in that one assignment, or should I keep the number of questions the same?
Sir, it's a number of questions same only, sir. If you will double, then
again the workload gets doubled. Right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah.
Actually, the problem. Sir, problem is that, sir, we are at home, sir, very difficult to manage actually, sir. If we are in hostel, no problem, sir, we can free time. But in home, sir, there are a lot of things are there, and we are not having friend circle also, sir. So how to wherever we are stuck, very difficult. We have to go to net only again, viewing the lecture, taking a lot of time, sir. This is very difficult situation, sir.
Yeah, I can understand. I am also working from home, and I can understand the difficulties of doing that.
Yes,
so yes, the purpose was actually a very innocent one, because last time the feedback that I got was that if more example problems were discussed, it would have helped students answer questions more easily in the midterm and final and so on, and also build more familiarity with the subject material. That was ultimately at the heart of all of this, is to help you guys build greater familiarity with whatever is taught. Unless you soil your hands, no matter how well or how badly I teach, you will not understand what is being thought. You have to soil your hands. You have to solve problems yourself. Okay. But if you think that this is putting too much of a pressure on you, okay, I've already sent homework 4. From this point forward, homework 4 itself, I can change the due date. Instead of having it due next Monday, I can have it due the Monday after that or the Friday after that or something, so that you get 2 weeks time. Is that fine? And then after that, I will give assignments only once in 2 weeks. The next homework 5 will be given only 2 weeks from now. Is that fine?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, so much.
Sir, can you do it for
Sir, like the previous assignment, third assignment, you gave the deadline you had written, I think 10th of November.
Yes, sir. Can you extend
the
that
date
also, sir?
Yeah, fine. You want to submit it?
10th,
how
10th
about,
Tuesday. You have written
I know there was a mistake. I said Monday 10th. So there was a mistake there. So how about we change that to the Friday? Next Friday, whatever the date might be.
Yeah, it's good. It's fine.
15th or something, right? So we'll have it due on 15th. And the homework 4 will be due next Friday, the Friday after that. And the homework 5 I will give only 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks from whenever I gave homework 4.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That would work.
Is that fine?
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes, sir. Thanks.
Oh, okay. Any questions that you guys have specific to the material that we discussed over the last 1 month? Or have you been, so it is a new mode of teaching. What is your feedback? Are you able to follow what is being taught? You find that I'm being too fast or too slow? See, there are some problems that we cannot avoid. This lag between what I write and what I say, I can only go so slowly. Apart from that, any other feedback about how we can improve this experience going forward?
So maybe next one you are telling Friday, no, next one means assignment 4. We can do that one on Monday. Next one again we will do with the same schedule, 5th one. But 4th one, if you do on Monday, sir, actually what is the advantage is that they'll get weekend. So they are doing nicely if they get weekend.
Okay, no issue. No issues. So instead of this Monday, we'll have it next Monday, exactly 1 week from now.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Monday it will be.
Okay, fine.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, can you have a session in which we can discuss like Q&As? Because I mean, during the lecture, I mean, it's really hard to like catch up with what you are teaching. So I mean, during the afternoon we see the video and we have got some queries. But I mean, it is really difficult to like.
Can you kindly speak a little slowly? I cannot understand you. I couldn't follow what you were trying to say.
Yeah. Okay, sir. I mean, can you have Q&A sessions? Because I mean,
question and answer sessions. You want to have what?
Different time question session. I mean, in which like we can ask questions to you, because I mean during the class it is really hard to like keep up with what you are teaching. So I mean after that we see the video and we have got some queries. So
he's asking for extra class.
So why don't you do one thing? I made that offer, right? Rather than have separate sessions, which is difficult to schedule, I have to come, take time off and so on. The better thing is the moment you watch the video and you get these questions, just send me an email. Okay, so I will set up a convenient time with you whenever you are okay and I'm okay, and I will contact you and we'll discuss all the questions you have.
So that is one-on-one session, sir?
One-on-one session, yes, I prefer that.
Yeah, okay, sir. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, other students, they may also have like same queries. So I mean.
Well, I cannot see
the. Maybe you can come 5 minutes early and leave 5 minutes late, and they can like
if
they are, they can.
That is also possible. You see, I can log in. Maybe in a regular class schedule itself. Instead of logging in at 5 minutes to 10, I can log in at 15 minutes to 10. And Yogesh can probably start recording this, earlier itself as soon as I log in. And you guys, anybody who has questions, if you also log in 15 minutes to 10, then we can have this Q&A session before the class starts. For 20 minutes, we can have the session, because I usually start 5 minutes past 10.
Yes, sure, sir.
That recording will be available to everybody.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, this is a good idea, sir, because we can immediately ask the questions actually, sir. Whatever happened in last class. So better to do it 20 minutes before, and we will ask the question. And this is good idea, sir, that we should do it. And we don't have class, sir, before that also, so we can log in.
Most people don't have class. Maybe 1 or 2 have class.
Sir, I am having class.
I know. There will always be one exception. But I will handle them separately. You can send me an email or we'll see what can be done.
Okay, sir, for them, we can wait at last 5-10 minutes if they are willing.
That's also possible. So after that, if you have time, we can also discuss after 11:30 for 5-10 minutes. I can take questions also. So we'll have 20 minutes before the class starts and some 10 minutes after the class is over. And together, those half an hour, therefore, will be devoted only for questions.
Yes, sure, sir. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Manoj had a question.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sir, actually, this is regarding the first section you presented in this lecture. That is this James Bond shooting a bullet and then the spin imparted to the bullet to stabilize it. So is this principle similar to the spin stabilization that was used in the previous generation non-gimbal rocket engines? Before these gimbal engines became mainstay in these launch vehicles. So previous generation, these the thrust vector these rockets might have been misaligned with the longitudinal axis of the launch vehicle. So to stabilize this launch vehicle, I saw this in a video that the rocket launch vehicle is rotated when at the time of launch, and when it reached orbit, it was de-spined using some sort of yo-yo de-spinning mechanism. So is that the same principle as this one? Because I don't understand when I was watching that video.
Well, I mean, it's a good question. The first part of the answer is I don't know what the technology is. So I don't know why it was used. But based on whatever you have described, I get the strong sense that it was used for this purpose itself. If you have some, the thrusters, as you say, if they're slightly misaligned, that will result in a torque, and that will misalign the launch vehicle perhaps. But having this having some spinning object inside will minimize the effect of that misalignment on the pointing direction of your launch vehicle. So I would expect that to be the reason. Exactly. So it would be analogous to a bullet. But since I don't know anything about this technology, if you can kindly email me a link or a video, I would be happy to watch that and confirm or not your hunch about why it was spun.
Sure, sir. I'll send a link, sir, that I was reading about the article that was reading.
Yeah, but it's a very common thing. I think so. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not the same purpose. Anyway, let us see. Any other question? Okay, then we will stop this meeting at this point. So thanks a lot for joining me on the weekend. So I wish you guys have a happy rest of the weekend then.
Sir, stop the recording, please.
How do I stop the recording, Yogesh?
From there only.
From
three dots.
3 dots itself, is it? Okay.
From where it started, I guess.
Stop recording.